Both of us have them missing the playoffs. I have them at 5-12. You have them at 4-13. Talk to me about the Titans, and then give me an offensive MVP for this team.
Yeah, the 4-13, I don't feel great about, just because I think they are better than that. It's just the way the wins and losses kind of shook out when we went through the playoff predictor and put this together. But I think they could be closer to 6 or 7. They brought in a lot of veteran talent, right? Tony Pollard, Lloyd Cushenberry. They just traded for Ernest Jones, which is a really good add for them at linebacker. They built up the trenches in the rookie class with J.C. Latham and Tavondre Sweat. They traded for L'Jarius Sneed. I'll admit they're probably better than a 4-win team. Don't take me too much to the cleaners on that one, because it's probably going to be closer to 6 or 7. I do think they're a competitive team. They're not going to be, the worst team in football or anything. They're not going to be the number 1 overall pick. I don't think – they just have too many good veteran players to be the worst team in football, right? But I do think it's hard to find the ceiling on this team unless – Will Levis gets significantly better, right? And you've got a guy who had the highest average depth of target in the NFL by almost 2 yards. I believe C.J. Stroud was actually second on that list.
Wait, Levis did? I didn't even realize that.
He had the highest ADOT by almost two whole yards, which honestly suits him, because he was kind of, when he was on at Kentucky, he was kind of the same way. Will Levis is a vertical passer. He wants to throw the ball beyond the chains. No, on every single play. There isn't many checkdowns going with Will Levis, right? And I think we saw that in his first game against Atlanta, just ripping the ball down the field. The problem is, what can come with that is a high variance level of play, right? We used to talk about this sort of thing with Josh Allen. Look, really good athlete, really good runner, big runner, 225, 230 pounds. He'll run right through you. This guy, Will Levis, is a football player for sure, but he's got to get more consistent down to down. There's too much high variance in his game. One guy, though, who kind of fits his skill set, who they brought in, who I think will be the offensive MVP, is Calvin Ridley. Calvin Ridley had a decent season. Okay. Decent season last year, I believe 1,000-yard season, but maybe we just have to admit that Ridley's not on that level of Justin Jefferson or Tyreek Hill or one of those guys. There was a track for that before he got suspended, but probably not going to happen now. But he's still a good target for this team to have. A 92.2 receiving grade on 10-plus yard targets last year. He can win downfield, right? And I think it fits with Levis if you're going to buy into it. If you're Brian Callahan. I was thinking of Bill. I had to think of his name. Brian Callahan. If you're Brian
They're
Callahan.
both there, so I mean, technically, you could have gotten away with it.
They're both there. I was stuck on Bill Callahan. I was like, what's it? It's Brian, right? Brian Callahan, who I saw speak at the Combine also. And I think he said a couple of things he's looking for in his quarterbacks, just accuracy and timing and some of those fundamental things, right? And Levis has to work on some of those fundamental things. Down the field, he can rip the ball down the field as well as anybody, right? And he does have to get more consistent underneath, but they're building this offense around him. They're trying to build this running game. You've got J.C. Latham in there. You got Peter Skoronski in year 2. You got Tony Pollard and Tyjae Spears. That's a good duo, even though you lost Derrick Henry. I think it's going to be run the ball. It's going to be play action. It's going to be throwing the ball well down the field, and I think Calvin Ridley helps with that. I'll take him as my offensive MVP.
Yeah, I'll touch on Levis really quick first. I didn't know that about the average depth of target. That's actually hilarious, but it's very on brand for also why you draft Will Levis, right? For the big arm, that's what you want to do. You want to be able to unlock that. When you talk about the receivers that you have now, it's a lot of veteran guys, okay, but DeAndre Hopkins, Calvin Ridley, Tyler Boyd, Traylon Burks, these guys got to be able to win vertically deep down the field, because very clearly that's how Will Levis plays, and I think that's what they're going to want to do. So the part about Levis that I think really needs to improve, along with the natural, more big-time throws, less turnover-worthy plays, because he was about even last year in the 8 games that he played. 30 sacks taken in 8 games from Will Levis. That was 24th in the NFL, and he only played 8 games. Most of these other guys are playing 16, 17 games that are ahead of him. So sacks per game, I don't have that number off the top of my head, but 30 sacks in just 8 games is something that the offensive line in Tennessee is a major question mark, and why I only have them around 5 or 6 wins this season. But just overall, Levis has to play and better and be able to escape that pressure and not take as many sacks himself. So that's a big part of his game that needs to mature, I think, for this season, for them to make sure that they say, hey, even though this isn't going to be the best year in the record books, we're sticking with Will going into next year. Moving forward, he could be hopefully their franchise guy. But Calvin Ridley, I agree, is the offensive MVP for this team. Really needs to step up. I think he needs to be the wide receiver 1, certainly with DeAndre Hopkins' status to start the year up in the air a little bit. But when you look at Ridley, I thought he had a solid year last year with the Jags, and I think it was a really good building block type of a season for him. He had a 76.5 grade in the preseason this year, which was the highest amongst the receivers for the Titans. Barely got over 1,000 yards last year, 72.2 receiving grade. I think there's more in the tank for Ridley to be an even better player for the Titans, and I think he'd be a focal point. And honestly, I think he could be wide receiver one for that group. So I think him emerging to that spot does mean a lot for this overall wide receiver room. What about defensive MVP? I think we got a lot of choices here for Tennessee, but who are you going with?
There's a lot of choices. They brought in some really good veteran players, but I'm going to go with a mainstay, and I think a mainstay that needs a bounce-back year, and that's Jeffrey Simmons up front. When we've seen the Titans be good in the past, he's really been the engine of their defensive line and their front seven. Look, and there's some other good guys they brought in around him. You drafted Tavondre Sweat to play right next to him, which there might not be a bigger pair of guys on the interior in all of football. They just traded for Ernest Jones to help at linebacker, but it all centers around Simmons. And his overall grade last year dropped from 81.1 to 68.4. He was dealing with injuries. He was playing through some injuries. His run defense especially was the part where you could really see him struggle. Still a good pass rusher, but the big thing is we're used to seeing this Titans team be really good in run defense. 2021 and 2022, they were top 10 in run defense grade. Last year, they dropped into the bottom 10. And I think a big part of that is Simmons dealing with his injuries and trying to play through them and trying to gut it out. And look, I fully respect that. Any guy who's out there playing hurt, and they're almost all playing hurt by the end of the season, I respect the hell out of that. But Simmons has to be that guy, right? I think there are times where we've seen him be among those elite defensive tackles, those top 10 defensive tackles that are really big-time difference makers, all the potential in the world. And, you know, I just think if he can be the centerpiece, right, everything else can fall in line. They're not great off the edge. You got Harold Landry out there who's solid in spurts. You've got Tavondre Sweat inside who's going to be more of a run stopper than a pass rusher. Although he had a good pass rush year at Texas last year, they're really trying to figure things out in this front seven. But if Jeffrey Simmons can get back to being the one constant star player, the star disruptor in the middle, that's a guy that can make their defense a hell of a lot better if he has a bounce back.
I'm going to say L'Jarius Sneed. I think that Sneed was a huge addition for this team. I think that he gives them a true CB1 like we have seen him be in Kansas City throughout their Super Bowl runs. He's somebody who I think can play inside and out. He can play man coverage. He can play zone coverage. Like this is a major part of their secondary that I think was missing. And I did not have the Titans as my favorite to land L'Jarius Sneed. And even when the news came that they were trading him to Tennessee, I was like, okay, I kind of thought Tennessee was a little bit more in like, let's rebuild here. Let's get a little bit younger. But then, you know, they had a guy like DeAndre Hopkins. They had a guy like L'Jarius Sneed. They had Calvin Ridley in free agency. And it's like, all right, I guess, you know, like we're staying and remaining competitive as we can, getting these veterans in here. And I think Sneed is going to be a big portion of this. You mentioned Simmons. I think he's a big part of their plans. Harold Landry obviously needs to continue to be good for them on the edge, which I think he will. But again, it is Sneed's versatility, his veteran presence for I guess it's not the youngest cornerback group now. Roger McCreary's a little bit older now, but I think the ceiling that Sneed brings them and his experience playing at the very highest level is going to be great, not only for their defensive scheme overall, but also for the rest of the cornerback room, for him to sort of lead by example, which I think is going to be big for them, and Chidobe Awuzie as well, along with McCreary. So I think the addition of Sneed's going to be big. What about a breakout player? Who you got as the Titans' breakout player?
So, you know, trenches are a big theme for me with this team, and I'm going to last year's 11th overall pick in Peter Skoronski. Look, I watched this tape every week last year, and I think you just saw a guy that had to adjust to a new position, right? Playing left guard. I know there's a whole thing about the short arms and lack of length and all of that stuff, but he had never taken a snap at guard in college, right? And he's a guy, I think he got better, especially in pass protection as the year went on. I think year two for Skoronski is going to be big. I think, look, he's a fantastic player. He's a talented player. Personally, I thought you could have given him a shot at tackle. I know the short arms thing is a problem. I like with how good before Joe Alt was Joe Alt, Notre Dame, and everything this year. Peter Skoronski was that guy at left tackle in college football at Northwestern. He was just so good, especially in pass protection, a good run blocker. Like, I know there's certain times physical traits take over in the evaluation, but with him, he's just such a good football player. But I think that level of talent and that level of just being that good a football player is going to help him at guard. And honestly, Trev, have you seen some of the double teams him and Latham are throwing at people in the preseason?
Yeah, that's the dream, right?
I mean, man, oh man. And then you think about what he's surrounded with last year. You know, so often guys on the offensive line, it has to be such a cohesive unit where it's like, if you don't have those guys around you that can help you and call things out and adjust the stunts and do all that stuff, well, yeah, you're going to look worse in the grading and your entire team's going to look worse in the grading. Now, you go from what they had last year to J.C. Latham to his left, and Lloyd Cushenberry, a top 10 center, to his right. I think it's a big-time situation. We're all talking about Latham and some of the veteran additions, but I think Skoronski's environment is way better. I think second year at the position, he's super smart. He's athletic. He's still a good pass protector, even at guard, even though he's kind of might be a little bit smaller of a guard than, some of your traditional guys that we've seen. But Skoronski, I think he's in for the breakout. And he was still last year, if you want to run those big power runs and get those double teams going, 16th among all guards in gap run block grade. So, and honestly, the Bengals with Brian Callahan last year, they ran a good amount of gap runs. Sometimes they just get in a duo and they come straight at you. So if Latham and Skoronski, I think that might be the biggest X factor for this whole offense, even beyond Will Levis. Those two guys on the left side gelling the way that we've seen in flashes in the preseason is big for them. That could legitimately, those two guys win them more games if they get in sync. And then with Cushenberry at center, that's a big-time base for them on the offensive line. I think they're doing a really good job building that, and I think Skoronski's in for a big year.
Yeah, for conversation's sake, I'll just kind of piggyback off of that with my best rookie. I'll name J.C. Latham as my best rookie here for the Tennessee Titans. I'll bounce back and say my breakout player in a second, but I agree. It might be a little bit of a transition, as it is for most young rookie offensive tackles in the NFL, to go up against NFL-style edge rushers, especially some good ones that we know the Titans are going to face this season. But I have a lot of faith in Bill Callahan as the offensive line coach there in Tennessee to get the most out of Latham and put him on a really great trajectory, not just to have a good rookie season, but to unlock what could be a potential Pro Bowl player for them. So that left side of the offensive line, I'm very excited about for the Tennessee Titans. My breakout player, though, I'll bounce back to that. I'm going to go running back Tajay Spears, right? I think that losing a major player like Derrick Henry when it comes to the identity of your football team is a really big deal. They bring in Tony Pollard in free agency, so I think that Pollard is going to have a little bit better of a year than he did last year in Dallas. But Spears, I'm very intrigued in, because I don't think it's just going to be a workhorse event with Tony Pollard there. I think that it is really going to be by committee. And I think it's because of what Tajay Spears showed us last year that could be the case. 0.26 missed tackles forced per attempt and 4.5 yards per carry were the best on the team in 2023, better than Derrick Henry. Now, obviously, Derrick Henry had a lot more volume, so, per attempt stats, they matter when you have a lot less volume and you can perform a little bit better. Maybe you're in more advantageous situations. But still, I wanted to shout that out as a big-time compliment for Spears and how well he played last year. 13 explosive runs on just 101 attempts last year as well. So Tajay Spears is somebody who I'm really looking forward to seeing. Yeah. Did you have something else on Spears or Latham or whoever? Because I kind of bounce around there.
Latham is also my best rookie. I thought about T'Vondre Sweat in this spot, but I think Latham, the big role that he's going to have and the possibility that left side could have a breakout, I think Latham has to be a big part of that. And on Spears too, I love what he does in the passing game, man. I loved him coming out of Tulane. I just thought he had a really dynamic skill set. I think you're right. I think Spears and Pollard running behind guys like Latham and Skoronski, that's going to be the base of this offense. I don't think you want Will Levis dropping back and throwing it 45 times a game. You don't. And I think Will Levis, even back at Kentucky, operated better with play action shots. When they had the run game going, I remember they had Chris Rodriguez down there. They had some good receivers. The year, I believe it was 2021, I think it was, that they had a really good supporting cast at Kentucky, and he just teed off because they could run the ball, they could take play action shots, they were balanced. This is the type of team that Brian Callahan's trying to build, right? But I think, for me, Latham's the best rookie also. I think maybe it takes some time to adjust mentally, some of the assignments. I think I see some things in the preseason where I go, okay, he's still adjusting to some of the schemes and learning the playbook and doing all that, but physically he's got everything you could want in a tackle, right? And I think it's a great call out on Spears. It's a great call out with Pollard. I think you have two good backs there. I know they're not riding Derrick Henry because he's not there anymore, but I think these two backs can make this a successful running game anyway. And even, two dynamic backs that can both help you in the passing game.
Go back to Will Levis. We got Ryan and Roddy in the chat saying that the Titans offense should look a little bit different than it was last year, obviously with the change of Brian Callahan now being there, bringing his offense over. Ryan says it's not going to be that many downfield passes. Roddy is saying that the game plan is going to be a little bit close to what we saw like with Jake Browning when he was in last year when Burrow got hurt. So maybe that's the case. And that'd be interesting to see for Will Levis if that is different, if they're not going to throw the ball as much deep down the field, because it's just like you said, like a lot of Will Levis's best plays when he was at Kentucky was a lot of those deep shots. And if it's maybe less of that, perhaps it rounds out his game a little bit more. So maybe that could be a maturing element of Will Levis's game to make him a more complete quarterback.
One thing I like that Callahan did with Browning was get him on the move, and there was a decent amount of bootleg too in Kentucky's passing game back when Levis was there. I think maybe a theme that you'll see then more is Levis in the bootleg game, right? When you talk about rolling out, taking that space. You mentioned with Anthony Richardson about half-field reads. Well, those bootlegs create half-field reads for a guy like Levis too, who sometimes he's going to get into his first read and then he's going to take off and run, but the bootleg is going to do that. So that's a big thing. I think to me, we're seeing it with the Bears a little bit as well, where maybe we can run off this left side and just get behind J.C. Latham and hammer people. Then we run a boot with Levis rolling to his right, and you got a big problem now. With all that space, we know Levis can run. He can run you right over, and maybe even take deep shots on the bootleg too. So I think maybe you see something. I think with Browning, that's what I saw, is they kind of got back to basics. We're going to run it, and we're going to run bootleg, and then when we have to drop back, we will. But that's going to be the foundation of the offense. I think that's actually a really, really good call. But anything where you can get Will Levis to use his feet and his arm at the same time and have that dual threat going, I think really helps Tennessee.